morning. So looking forward to this camp meeting week. So looking forward to camp meeting. We get the privilege of driving by the camp, on every time we come to church, and Sylvanus gets the privilege of living there. But anyway, drove by this morning and looked at the grounds. They're all mowed and looking nice, and them new doors on the tabernacle looking pretty good, and everything's looking really nice over there. So looking forward to a good camp meeting. I hear we're going to have us a crowd, so that'll be a blessing. That'll be a real blessing to have us a nice crowd. I think they said Brother Croft was coming every night of camp meeting. They said Brother Croft would be there every single night of camp meeting. That's a real blessing, Brother Croft. Looking forward to seeing you there every night. Brother Wayne said you could sit with him every night of camp meeting while you're over there. So anyway, all right. If you have your Bible, turn to John chapter number 11. John chapter number 11, and we will continue on in what we were looking at last week. Obviously, what we've been looking at, but we're in John chapter number 11, and we're going to start in verse number 37. We're going to start in verse number 37 this morning, and we mentioned it last week, and we're gonna hit on it a little bit more. And so in John chapter 11, verse number 37, it says, "Some of them said, 'Could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind had caused that even this man should not have died?' In verse 38, Jesus therefore again groaning in himself cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it." And so again, I said last week that there are a couple possible scenarios here. There are people who could have said this out of an honest heart. They could have truly believed, hey, had Jesus been here, he could obviously he healed the sick. He could have healed the sick. He could have healed Lazarus before he died. I think there could have been people who honestly were there and felt that way, but I don't think that's who this is. I think this. If you turn back to Luke chapter number 20, turn back to Luke chapter number 20. We're going to look at something right here. And Luke chapter number 20, verse number 9, and it says, "Then began he to speak to the people this parable. A certain man planted a vineyard, and led it forth to the husbandman, and went into a far country for a long time. And at the season he sent a servant to the husbandman, that they should give him of the fruit of the vineyard. But the husbandman beat him, and sent him away empty. And again he sent another servant, and they beat him also, and entreated him shamefully, and sent him away empty. And again he sent a third, and they wounded him also, and cast him out. Then said the Lord of the vineyard, What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. It may be that they will reverence him when they see him. But when the husbandmen saw him, they reasoned among themselves, saying, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours. So they cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. What therefore shall the Lord of the vineyard do unto them?" Now, I'm not going to flip over, but in Matthew, he actually gets them to answer this question. In verse 16, "He shall come and destroy these husbandmen, and shall give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, God forbid. And he beheld them and said, What is this then that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner. Whosoever shall fall upon that stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder." Verse 19, "And the chief priest and the scribes the same hour sought to lay hands on him, and they feared the people, for they perceived that he had spoken this parable against them." So here is Jesus, and he's given a parable, and we know that from from our previous study, we know how antagonistic the relationship became between Jesus and the scribes, Jesus and the chief priests, Jesus and the elders, Jesus and the Pharisees. It was a very antagonistic relationship. They were constantly trying to trip him up. They were constantly trying to catch him. They were constantly trying to find some kind of fault in him. They were, you know, in John chapter number 2, if you remember, he started out when he flipped those tables over and threw the people and the animals and stuff out of the temple. The first thing that they said is, hey, what sign? You know, what sign showest thou that that you have a right? This is my terminology here, but you have a right to do what you just did. And if you remember John chapter number 3, we talked about that they obviously were having this conversation because Nicodemus says, you know, we know that thou art a teacher come from God, for no man can do the miracles thou doest except God be with him. They had this conversation, and I believe they knew who he was, and here Jesus is telling them in a parable. He's telling them in a parable, and they can no doubt look at themselves and look and see that they had slain, their previous generations had slain the prophets. Previous generations had slain the prophets. They'd killed the prophets. And now here it is. Now he's saying, hey, the Son is come, and you're going to kill the Son also. The Son has come, and you're going to kill the Son also. And what do you think God the Father is going to do when you kill the Son? But in verse 19, it says, and the chief priests and the scribes, verse 20, verse 19, they realized that at the end of the verse, for they perceived that he had spoken this parable against them. So they knew that Jesus was saying that they were the ones that were doing the killing. They were the ones that had taken something that God had given them, and they had taken advantage of it. And every time they were called to account, instead of doing what they were supposed to do, they just killed the prophet for calling them out for doing wrong. But verse number 20, look at this. And they watched him and sent forth spies which should feign themselves just men, that they might take hold of his words, that so they might deliver him unto the power and authority of the governor. I'm not going to read verse 21, but they're going to try and catch him. The passage about render to Caesar that which is Caesar's. But in verse 20, right there, they watched him and sent forth spies which should feign themselves just men. And so these chief priests, these elders, these scribes, they said, hey, we're going to send these people. We're going to send actors. We're going to send people in amongst him. We're going to send them, and they're going to act like they're good people. They're going to act like they're just. So obviously, if you have to act like you're a just man, guess what? You're not a just man. You're having to act. You're having to pretend to be something that you're not. And so these chief priests said, hey, we're going to take these men and they accused Jesus of associating with publicans and sinners, but here they are acknowledging the fact that they're going to take these unjust men. They're going to take these unjust men, and they're going to try to use these unjust men to filter their way into the crowd that follows Jesus. And while they're in the crowd that follows Jesus, they're going to act like they're good men. And while they're acting like they're good men, they're just going to bring up some things. They're just going to throw out some things every once in a while. They're just going to say a little word here and a little word there. You're going to see them all. You're going to see them all the way. And many times Jesus does something. He does something good, and then out of nowhere it seems here someone says something. You're like, well, Wait a second. How could you have just watched? How could you have just watched what Jesus did, or in our passage right here, what Jesus is about to do? How could you watch that, and yet you watched what happened, and instead of saying, oh, surely this is the Son of God, surely, just like Nicodemus, no man can do the miracles thou doest except God be with him. But no, these men were unjust men. They were unjust men that the chief priest and the scribes and the rulers and the elders were using to try and trap Jesus. And so when we look in John chapter number 11, I believe that when verse 37 is said, and some of them said, could not this man, which opened the eyes of the blind, had caused even this man should not have died. I believe even though Brother Tyrone, it's amazing that these men, well, actually we're gonna see why in chapter number 12. But these men, they watched Jesus. They saw Jesus work. They saw his miracles. They saw God do what he asked. If it was a blind man that needed to receive his sight, God gave that blind man sight. If it was a lame man that hadn't walked, God let that lame man walk through Jesus. And yet they watched him, and they confessed right there. They said, could not this man which has opened the eyes of the blind? If you remember, I believe it was John 8, whenever the blind man from birth, he said, hey, has from the foundation of the world, from the beginning of the world, has a blind man ever received his sight? And so these men are acknowledging that Jesus did these miracles, but Chris, it did not matter to them. But they just threw it out there. They were constantly trying to corrupt people's minds. Have you ever been around someone who's that way? Have you ever been around someone who's that way? Brother Wayne, you ever around someone and you just, and for me, I generally kind of just sit back. I'm not huge at participating in conversation most of the time. I just kind of sit back and listen. But there are people that they just can't help themselves. They can't help themselves. I mean you can be talking about my father-in-law used to make fun of people because it's like, yeah, it sure is a beautiful day today, and they're like, yeah, but it's going to rain tomorrow. But there are people that they're constantly just trying to cut other people down. They're constantly trying to just cut other people down. They're constantly just trying, like, oh, I don't, everyone's bragging on this person, so I'm gonna. Well, you don't know what I know, and that's just an open-ended statement, and that's all they have to say. And then now people's minds and imaginations will take over for themselves. You don't have to say. That's all you have to say. What Miss Jimmy was talking about was talking about the. Had I introduced the gentleman here to Brother Wayne, and I said, Brother Wayne's a really good guy, but I could have said, yeah, Brother Wayne, he's all right. And if you know me, they'll be like, well, wait a second. If Brother Paul just said he's all right, what did he mean by just all right? I mean, is there something wrong with him? Is there something wrong with him? I mean, I'm not holding against him that he went to Florida State or anything. But, I mean, you understand. I mean, just all you have to do is just say just a little bit. You don't have to say, well, I'll tell you what, that Brother Wayne, I'll tell you the 5 sins I know about Brother Wayne. You just have to insinuate that you know something about him. And when you insinuate that you know something about him, the people are like, I'll tell you what, I don't know about that Brother Wayne. He must be a bad guy. Why? Have you ever seen him do anything wrong? No. Have you ever heard about him doing anything wrong? No, not really. But, someone said, well, I know some things. And because they said I know some things, then obviously there must be some things, because they wouldn't say I know some things unless there were some things. And a lot of times there's not things. It's just someone that's jealous, someone that's bitter, someone that's angry, someone that just can't stand. You just can't stand it, and so they're like, I'm just going to say something. And so that's what these men's job was. From the chief priest and the rulers, they said, hey, we want you to go, and we want you to constantly be trying to trap him. We want you to just ask questions, and we want you to just say little snarky things. and you're never really going to get Jesus. But the more people that you can turn, the more people's minds that you can question and say, well, you know what, that is right. That is right. If he had been here, maybe he would have died. And you know what I heard? I heard from his disciples that when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he didn't come immediately. He waited 2 more days. And that's terrible. He could have healed Lazarus, but because he waited 2 more days, Lazarus died sometime possibly. Again, y'all know my thoughts and feelings. I said it last week. There's a very good chance that Lazarus was already dead by the time Jesus heard about it, because he tells his disciples in verse 14, then said Jesus unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Not Lazarus will be dead by the time we get there, but Lazarus is dead. And so again, but here are these men, and their job is to just throw those little things out there, Chris. Just say little things, just say little snarky things, just say little cutting things, say little questioning things. Just drop a question. Just, if he really was the Son of God, do you really think he'd be, wouldn't he already be set up as a king? Wouldn't he already be, wouldn't he already have this? I mean, why would he just be wandering around like he is? It really doesn't even have a place to lay his head. I mean, can you imagine a guy that's a king and he's wandering around like a hobo? I mean, do you really think he could be, that could really be, and just saying those things. So in verse 38, it says that Jesus, therefore, again, groaning in himself, and it tore him up, Chris. It made him angry. It made him angry that these men were here, and they were questioning him. And yet, because we know that, because Jesus told them that this sickness was for the glory of God, it was so that Jesus could receive glory over what was going to happen. But yet these men were here, and these men were watching, and that's gonna come into play here in a minute. And so we get down to verse 39. It says, Jesus said, take ye away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, saith unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. Now, if you remember from verse 20, then Martha, as soon as she heard Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary sat still in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died, but I know that even now whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. And so verse 22, I know even now whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. And we discussed that last week, that it almost appears that whenever she said that, it almost appeared that she had all this faith, that believed that Jesus was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. But then whenever you skip down in verse number 24, Jesus says to her in verse 23, thy brother shall rise again. Martha saith unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. So Jesus and Martha have this conversation. They have this conversation back and forth. They have a conversation, and you can see that Martha just missed it. Her words were right. I mean, what she said was so true, that whatsoever thou would ask of God, God will give it thee. Her words were right, but she just lacked that mustard seed faith, just a little bit of faith that said, you know what, I'm not just going to say these words, but I'm going to say something out loud. I'm going to say something out loud to say, I believe that you can raise Lazarus from the dead today. She didn't. She almost made it, but she just missed it. And you see again that she missed it, because even here, now we have Jesus, and why else would you go to the grave? And I'm sorry if y'all are this way, forgive me. But this is my personality. Like I don't visit the grave. I mean, we were up there. We were up in Maryland. We took a different route to go somewhere, and right there was the grave where my dad is buried. It's just a place. It's just a place where my dad's buried. My dad, his body's there, but he's not there. And so I've never even seen the marker, Chris. I've never seen the marker. Now, if you do, I'm not judging you. I understand everyone has different personalities. Everyone has different personalities. And if you go and you sit and you go to the grave, that doesn't bother me a bit. I'm not judging you. I'm just saying my personality, like why would I go to the grave? My father is not there. He's not there. And so I can't talk to him. If I talk to him, he can't hear me. He's not there. And so what were they thinking? Like, here is Jesus going to the grave. It's like he just wants to see the stone. I mean, they don't even have like nice stones, now they'll carve out, and if you're a truck driver, they'll put a tractor and trailer on there, or something like that, and they'll carve their life verse on there, they'll put a Bible on there, they'll put some butterflies on there, they'll put it, it'll be real nice, and they'll have their name carved in there, and their date of their birth, and the date of their death, and it'll be really nice. I mean, and some of them are really elaborate and expensive, but they didn't have that back then. There was no carving, Brother Jay. There was no carving on there. Someone didn't carve out in calligraphy style writing, in big fancy writing. It didn't say Lazarus on there. Died AD 33. It didn't say that. It didn't say that. All it is a hole. It's a cave and a stone over the cave. What did they think when Jesus went to that? Was standing there like, hey, let's go there. What did they think was going to happen? And again, like I said, this was not going to be the first time that Jesus raised someone from the dead. This was going to be the first time Jesus raised someone that had been dead 4 days. But it was not the first time that Jesus raised someone from the dead, but yet they're at the graveside. And now Jesus said, take away the stone. And Martha had an opportunity again. She had an opportunity again to say, you're going to raise my brother. That was her opportunity, Chris. And I told y'all last week, that I think, that I believe when we get to heaven, we're going to get to heaven and we're going to realize we missed some stuff. We just missed it. We just, we got our mind focused on other things, and we just missed some stuff. We read the Bible and read the Bible and read the Bible and read it 100 times, 200 times, 250 times, and yet we never did what we were supposed to, Chris. I think we're going to get there. But I also think there's going to be a lot of opportunities that we're going to see later, and Jesus is going to be like, I gave you this opportunity. I gave you this opportunity. I think a lot of it's going to be witnessing. I think a lot of it's going to be like, hey, I had this sinner. I had them right in front of you. I gave you the opportunity. They were broken. They were looking for something, and you decided to talk about baseball. You decided to talk about football. You decided to talk about old Hollywood movie stars. You decided to talk about anything else in the world but Jesus. I think there are opportunities where we may look back on our life one day and say, I really missed it right here. I missed it right here. God was doing something for me right there, and God had opened the door, and I had an opportunity, and yet I missed it. And here's Martha. Jesus is giving Martha another chance right here. She was so close when she said that God will do. I know even now whatsoever thou would ask of God, God will give it thee. And she was so close right there, Riley. But here we are. Jesus gives her another opportunity. He's like, hey, take away the stone. But Martha, the sister of him that was dead, saith on him, Lord, by this time he stinketh. She missed her opportunity. It was gone that fast. It was gone that fast because Jesus had plainly, he told her, Martha, thy brother shall rise again. That's pretty plain, isn't it, Brother Tyrone? I mean, sometimes we need it in big block letters. And you can put it in big block letters and still just be like, I don't see a thing. And so Jesus put it, Brother Wayne, in big block letters. Martha, thy brother shall rise again. Jesus told her, this is what I'm going to do for you. And yet here we are. We've made our way to the graveside. We've made our way up there. There's zero reason to open the grave. Why would you open the grave, Chris? It has been 4 days. By now, he does stink. You're not going to see him because he's wrapped in grave clothes. My understanding is, if you've ever seen like an Egyptian mummy, basically they wrap them up similar to what we picture an Egyptian mummy, where they wrap them up, they lay a napkin across there. What would be the purpose? What would have been the purpose of opening the grave? I don't know. I was mowing a yard yesterday, Riley, and something was dead, and I don't enjoy that smell. I don't enjoy that smell. I don't know what it was, and I didn't investigate what it was. I just said, we're going to mow as quick as we can over here so we can get further away so that I don't have to smell that smell. What did they think the purpose was? And of all people, who should have known? Martha should have known. She should have said, oh, wait a second. I said that whatsoever you ask of God, even now God will do it. And he said my brother's going to rise again. And now here we are at the grave, and he says, roll away the stone. My brother's about to rise again. And she missed it. She missed her opportunity. She said, by now he stinketh, because he's been dead 4 days. Jesus saith unto her, said I not unto thee that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? He said, Martha, you were this close. I told you if you just believe, you'd see the glory of God. I told you, if you would just believe, if you would just trust me, that you would see the glory of God. Verse 41, then took they away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. And Jesus prays right here. He prays. And again, he says, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. Jesus knew what he was going to do. He knew the last time he saw Lazarus and Mary and Martha. He knew the last time whenever he saw them that Lazarus no doubt said, I'll see you later, Lord. And Jesus said, yes, you will. And Mary didn't understand what he meant, and Martha didn't understand what he meant, and Lazarus wouldn't have understood what he meant, but Jesus knew exactly what he meant. And when they came to him, when they sent to Jesus and said, hey, he whom thou lovest is sick, when they sent to him, Jesus said, you know what, boys, he's sick, but we're going to stay here a few more days. We're just going to stay where we're at a few more days. And he told them, he said, Lazarus is, first he said he sleepeth, and they didn't understand. And then he said, told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And so he knew all along, Chris, he knew all along. When Martha came to him and talked to him, he knew that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. And he knew that God would raise Lazarus from the dead. So he said, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. And I knew that thou hearest me always. Jesus said, there's never a time, God, when I call on you that you don't hear me. Because they're one. I and the Father are one. But because of the people which stand by, I said it, that thou may believe, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. So here's Jesus again. And he set this whole scenario up. He set this whole scenario up, Brother Tyrone, and so he waited 2 extra days. Why? Because it's one thing whenever he come in and said, oh, that she, they said she's dead, and he's like, no, she's just asleep, and they laughed him to scorn, but she hadn't been dead very long. But it's a whole different ball game when they've been dead 4 days. It's a whole different ball game when they've wrapped them up in the grave clothes, and sealed that stone and said, he's gone forever. It's a whole different story. And so here Jesus said, I did this so that they might believe. I did this so that they could see, they could know, they could see what happened, and they could know in their heart that God did this. In verse 43, it says, and when he had thus spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And so you can imagine right here. Now here he is, he's standing there, and again, nobody knew what was going to happen. Not even Martha, even though Martha had been told what was going to happen. Not even Martha, even though it appeared she had faith in Jesus that he could do it. Not even Martha knew what was going to happen. But he cries, Lazarus, come forth. And can you imagine the look on all these people's face? First of all, I thought about it. It had to be true, Chris. When they rolled that stone away, we were riding, we went to Dalton yesterday. My mother-in-law's birthday's this week, so we took my mother-in-law out to eat yesterday. And so happy birthday to my mother-in-law. Anyway, and so we took her out to eat, and in between Resaca and where the Resaca battlefield is on the railroad tracks, there's a skunk that got hit, and it's sitting right on the side of the railroad track. It looks like it's just sitting right on the railroad tracks. But it was there when we went up, and it was there when we come back. So I don't think it's just sitting there. And the smell coming from it tells me that it's not just sitting there. I think it's dead. So you again, like I said, if you've ever been around something that's dead, like sometimes something will die in our basement, and my wife will be like, something's dead down there. Something's dead down there. It smells bad down there. And so we got to send Grady down there to look for it because he's the youngest child, and that's what youngest children do. They get all the dirty jobs. But you don't even want to go down there. You don't even want to go down there. And here they roll this grave, and no doubt, you can imagine there's already a look on everyone's face like, oh my word, what is he doing? And oh, the smell's so bad, it's terrible. And then he says, Lazarus, come forth, and it goes from, oh, this stinks, it's terrible, to, what did he just say? What did he just say? Did he just say what I think I heard him say? Did he really just say what I think I heard him say? In verse 44, it says, and he that was dead came forth. So out from this stinking, rotten cave, this stinking, rotten tomb, out comes Lazarus, bound hand and foot, again, like a mummy. He comes wandering out. And again, I always think about this. I would have been the first. I would have been like, hey, Lazarus, tell me about it. I would have been like, can you tell me about it? What was it like on the other side? Tell me about what it was like on the other side. Tell me what was it like? What was it like? Obviously you were dead, and yet somehow, not just your body laying there in that tomb, but wherever your soul was, wherever your spirit, wherever that was, wherever you were, you heard, boys, y'all, wait a second. That's Jesus, and he just called my name. That's Jesus. He just called my name. And what was that like? What was that like? Who, again, like I said, this is just my mind and my mind wandering like that. Who were you talking to? I mean, we know from Luke 16, you got Abraham, and it's a different Lazarus, so don't confuse me right there. But you got Abraham there, and there's that great gulf fixed. But I mean, it's obviously they could talk amongst themselves, Brother Jay. Who'd you see down there? Who'd you talk to? Who? Did you make any new friends while you were in the grave 4 days? Well, what was going on down there? Again, that's just my mind wandering. But he comes bound hand and forth with grave clothes, and his face bound about with a napkin. Jesus saith unto them, loose him and let him go. And so, I mean, again, like I said, I don't know. I mean, the Bible, John is the only one that gives an account of this, but the Bible doesn't tell us everything. But I mean, can you just imagine these people? Can you imagine their faces? Can you imagine their thoughts as they see this happen, as they see this go on, and they're like, did you see what I saw? Did you hear what I heard? Did you smell what I smelled? And yet, when he said Lazarus come forth, he was obviously dead. Again, like I said, I mean, once that smell's there, there's no question about it. There's no question about it. He was obviously dead, and yet Jesus said, "Lazarus, come forth," and there was no faking that. There was no setting that up. And so, in verse 45, it said, "Then many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did believed on him." So many people that were there, many people that were watching, they came out to comfort Mary and Martha because Lazarus was dead. And they didn't know when they left Jerusalem to come over to help, to comfort Mary and Martha. And again, I don't know how much comfort they were. I mean, it's one of the hardest, to me, it's one of the hardest times in life is what do you say to someone? What do you say to someone that just lost a loved one, especially someone that lost a loved one unexpectedly? I mean, it's one thing. It's one thing when someone's way up in age and they've been sick and they pass away, but it's a whole other thing when someone passes away unexpectedly. And I don't think Lazarus was of an age that it was like, oh well, I mean. I remember when my dad's kidneys shut down several years. He lived 4 or 5 years after this, but he was a very large man, and his kidneys shut down. And the doctor, when we went in, the doctor kept talking about quality of life, quality of life, quality of life, and we're like, what are you talking about? He walked into the hospital, and the doctor's like, oh, well, I didn't realize that. Well, yeah, he walked himself into the hospital. He was out of his head because his kidneys are shut down. He was full of toxins, but he walked himself into the hospital. And so it was almost like the doctor was saying, hey, if you don't do this, we can just let him die because he's not going to have any quality of life. And then we're like, what are you talking about? He walked into the hospital. He was for the most part, except he had a bad heart, but still, I mean, he lived years after that. He's fine. And so sometimes people are like, oh, well, they're well up in age, and they've had cancer, they've had this sickness for many, many years, and they've just fought it, and they're just skin and bones. Okay, I get it. But Lazarus, that wasn't who Lazarus was. And so these people, they came and they came to comfort, and instead, they got to meet Jesus. And no doubt they'd heard about him. Again, like I said, even the fake people had heard about Jesus. Even the fake people had seen Jesus heal the blind. Even the fake people had seen Jesus heal the sick. Give the blind sight. Even the fake people had seen these things. And no doubt they'd heard about Jesus. And Mary and Martha, no doubt, were lamenting the fact, because they said it multiple times, Lord, if you had just been here, he wouldn't have died. If you had just been here, our brother would not have died. No doubt, as these Jews, they come, they sit down with Mary and Martha. Mary and Martha are like, if Jesus had just been here. if Jesus had just been here. If Jesus had just been here. I just don't understand. We sent for him and told him, he whom thou lovest is sick, and he didn't come, and we don't understand, because if Jesus had just been here, our brother wouldn't have died. And so now these people had heard about Jesus. Now they saw Jesus, and they saw Jesus work one of his greatest miracles, if not his greatest miracle. A man that had been dead 4 days is raised alive. I mean, can you imagine, Brother Jay? Can you imagine? Even if you were a doubter, and again, like I said, I mean, I'm somewhat of a skeptic. I am. I want to, I don't want to say I'm as far as Thomas, but I like to see it and then I'll believe it. You know, someone just because someone says something, Brother Wayne, you can tell me all day long Ford's the best truck in the world, but you're going to have to give me some evidence that a Ford's better than a Chevrolet, or a Dodge, or whatever. I'm going to have to see it. But even if you're a doubter, even if you're the biggest skeptic known to man, even if you don't want to believe it, would you not, after watching Jesus, say, roll that stone away? Roll that stone away. Smell that smell and know Lazarus was dead. There wasn't no faking this. There wasn't no setting this up. Lazarus was dead. Wouldn't you? Many believed. Many said, you know what? He answered all my questions. Riley, he answered all my questions. Every question I ever had about him, he answered it that day. I'd heard a lot of things about him, but I saw it with my own eyes. But verse number 46. But some of them went their way to the Pharisees and told them what things Jesus had done. That were those people from Luke chapter number 20. That was those same people from Luke chapter number 20. Those same exact people in verse number 20. And they watched him and sent forth spies, which should feign themselves just men, that they might take hold of his words, that so they might deliver him unto the power and authority of the governor. That was those same men right there, Chris. Right here in verse number 46, they watched everything that Jesus did and said, doesn't mean a thing to me. Doesn't mean a thing to me. We got a job to do. Why? Because they were unjust men. They were unjust men. And they saw everything that Jesus did in verse number, and I'm going to skip ahead of myself. This will be next week. But in verse number, chapter 12, verse number 37, it says, but though he had done so many miracles before them, yet they believed not on him, that the saying of Isaiah the prophet might be fulfilled, which he spake, Lord, who hath believed our report? And to whom hath the arm of the Lord been revealed? Therefore they could not believe. Because that Isaiah saith again, he hath blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, that they should not see with their eyes, nor understand with their heart, and be converted, and I should heal them. These things said Isaiah when he saw his glory and spake of him. That's who these men were. That's who these men were. These men were people that when they could believe, they did believe. When they had their opportunity, they said, no. And then their opportunity was gone, just like Pharaoh. God started hardening Pharaoh's heart. And God said he hardened these men's heart. And so we have to be careful. We have to be careful because sometimes we watch and we see and we reject. We reject light. And we reject that light, and then it becomes darkness. And so here are these men, they saw this miracle, first-hand account of the miracle, And Brother Jay, it was nothing to them. How could you even watch what you saw and it just be nothing? Oh well, here's my job, boys. Let me go tell you what happened. Let me tell you what he said. Let me tell you what he did. There you go. There's my report. Boom. There's my report. Where's my money? Pay me now. Pay me now, and I'll go back and we'll do something else. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, again, like I said, sometimes I get jealous because I read the Bible. I'm like, man, it would have been awesome. Like Peter, Lord, it was good for us to be here. Sometimes I read the Bible like, man, it would have been so great to see Jesus perform any miracle. Whether it was turning the water into wine, or whether it was, healing a blind man, or healing a lame man, or casting out devils, or any one of the miracles, it would have been great to see any one of them firsthand. But they saw Lazarus raised from the dead after 4 days. And all they said was, yep, yep. Here's my report. What a shame. What a shame. And I think even in 2023, there are people that sit in a church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, sit in a camp meeting, and Chris, just like those people in John chapter number 12, they're not ever going to believe. Because when they had a chance, they didn't take the chance. When they had the opportunity, they rejected. And then it became nothing to them. Thank you.